Noah woke to the sound of Blaze's furious barking. The 12-year-old boy sat up, heart thudding, as the dog hurled himself at the front door, teeth flashing in the moonlight. The wooden porch trembled beneath his paws. Through the cracks of the window, Noah saw an orange glow moving across the wheat fields like a hungry monster. Then came the screams, neighbors shouting, a horse whinnying in terror, the sharp crack of something breaking. A moment later, the smell of smoke hit him. His father's voice boomed from outside, urgent and afraid. "Hannah, get Noah out now." Noah's bare feet hit the floor. The boards were already warm. Blaze snarled and darted past him, herding him toward the back door. Hannah rushed into the room, her hair loose from sleep, eyes wide. She grabbed Noah's arm. "The barn's on fire," she gasped. "Eli's out there." The boy stumbled after her, clutching his nightshirt. Outside, the night sky glowed a terrible orange, thick smoke rolling in from the east. Blaze stayed at Noah's side, hackles raised, ears pinned back as if he could sense an unseen enemy in the flames. Near the barn, Eli wrestled with the wooden gate, trying to free the frightened mule trapped inside. Sparks blew across the yard like a storm of fireflies. Somewhere beyond the fields, a wagon rattled away fast. Too fast. Noah caught a glimpse of two men silhouetted against the burning wheat. One of them turned back for a second. The moonlight revealed a face twisted into a triumphant sneer. Clint Voss, Eli growled under his breath, the land-hungry cattleman who had been trying to buy their farm for months. The mule bolted as the gate finally gave way. Eli coughed, his face streaked with soot. He shouted for Hannah to get Noah to the riverbank. But as she turned, a flaming beam from the barn roof crashed down, splitting the yard in two. Blaze barked fiercely, circling the fallen beam, then darted toward the fence. He found a gap and pushed through, running ahead as if to scout a safe path. Hannah, clutching Noah's hand, followed the dog. Behind them, Eli fought to save what he could, but another explosion of flame from the hayloft forced him to retreat. The three of them, Hannah, Noah, and Blaze, stumbled toward the river, the air thick with smoke. Sparks drifted down like burning snowflakes. Somewhere in the chaos, another house caught fire. A neighbor screamed. Halfway to the riverbank, Noah tripped on a root. Blaze instantly doubled back, grabbed the boy's sleeve in his teeth, and hauled him to his feet. The dog's eyes shone in the firelight, full of fierce urgency. They reached the river as the wind shifted, carrying a wave of heat that scorched Noah's cheeks. Hannah waded in up to her knees, pulling her son with her, just as a burning plank flew from the barn and landed in the grass behind them. For a moment, it seemed they had escaped the worst. But then, through the smoke, a black-hatted figure appeared on the hill, Clint Voss himself, holding a torch. He raised it high, then hurled it toward the last standing section of their farmhouse. "No!" Eli's shout tore through the night. He tried to reach Voss, but two of the man's hired thugs stepped out from the shadows and blocked him. One shoved Eli back with a stick. The other swung a fist. Eli staggered but stayed upright, his eyes blazing with fury. Blaze growled, baring his teeth. For a heartbeat, he seemed ready to charge straight at the men. But then Hannah cried out. A burning branch had fallen across the path behind her, trapping her and Noah on the riverbank. Eli saw them and leapt forward, shoving one thug aside and breaking through the line. He ran to his wife and son, coughing hard from the smoke. "We have to cross the river," he rasped. The water was shallow but icy and fast. Hannah clutched Noah tighter. Blaze stepped in first, testing the current, then splashed forward, looking back as if to say, "Follow me." Step by step, the family waded across. Halfway through, the current tugged at Noah's legs. He slipped and went under for a second. Blaze lunged, gripping the boy's sleeve again, and hauled him upright. Hannah pulled him close, whispering his name. When they reached the far bank, all three collapsed in the damp grass. The farmhouse behind them was fully ablaze, flames roaring into the night sky. The orange glow reflected in the river, making it look like molten metal. They lay there, coughing and shivering, watching everything they had built burn to the ground. Eli's arm was around Hannah. Noah leaned against his mother, still shaking. Blaze sat beside them, chest heaving, his fur singed in patches, but his eyes were fixed on the hill where Clint Voss had stood. Far off, they could still see the glow of the departing wagon as it disappeared into the darkness. Hannah's voice trembled. Why would he do this? Just to take our land. Eli's jaw clenched. He won't stop until he gets it. But he'll regret this night. Noah pressed his face into Blaze's neck, trying not to cry. The dog nuzzled him gently, then looked back at the burning house again, ears pricked, as if memorizing the scent of their enemy. The distant wail of villagers approaching came faintly through the smoke. Help was on the way, but far too late. Eli rose unsteadily to his feet. We'll rebuild, he said, more to himself than to anyone else. We'll start again. Hannah held Noah tighter, silent tears streaking her soot-stained cheeks. Blaze shifted his weight and moved to stand in front of them all, as if he were already taking on the duty of guarding what little was left. The muscles beneath his scarred fur tensed. His eyes stayed fixed on the dark line of the hills where Clint Voss had vanished. The river rushed by at their backs, carrying ash and glowing embers downstream. The wind carried the smell of smoke for miles. And though the first pale streaks of dawn were appearing on the horizon, the night felt far from over. In that moment, on the muddy riverbank with nothing left but each other, a silent vow passed between the dog and the boy. They would survive. And someday they would make Clint Voss pay. Noah stood in the ruins of what had been their home, gripping Blaze's collar as if the dog were the only thing holding him upright. The dawn light revealed blackened beams, the skeleton of the barn, and the faint smell of wet ash carried by the river breeze. Neighbors had come at first light, bringing buckets and blankets, but their faces were grim. No one dared speak Clint Voss's name aloud. Hannah sat on a toppled fence rail, staring at the ground, while Eli argued in a low, angry voice with the sheriff, who had arrived late and alone. The sheriff's voice was weary. Eli, I know you believe Voss did this. But without witnesses willing to testify, I can't make an arrest. Eli's soot-blackened face hardened. He came with his men. We saw him throw the torch. The sheriff glanced around at the neighbors, all of whom shifted their gaze away. And did any of them see it? Silence. Only the soft lap of the river against the bank and the rustle of Blaze's fur as he shifted his weight. Hannah finally spoke, her voice raw. They're afraid. Voss owns half the land here. He pays their wages. The sheriff sighed. I'll write up a report. But unless someone's willing to testify, there's nothing I can do. Eli's jaw worked, as if he were chewing on the words he wanted to say. Finally, he muttered, then we'll have to fend for ourselves. That afternoon, the neighbors helped bury the mule that hadn't survived the fire. Blaze stayed close to Noah, never letting the boy wander too far from his side. The dog's singed fur had been cleaned, but the smell of smoke still clung to him. By evening, it became clear the family could not stay on the ruined land. The farmhouse was gone, the winter crops destroyed, and Hannah's persistent coughing worried Eli. They would have to go into town and stay with relatives until they could rebuild. Noah hated the thought of leaving. Standing beside Blaze, he looked across the charred fields, fists clenched. I won't forgive him, he whispered. Not ever. Blaze gave a soft whine, almost as if in agreement. A week later, the family prepared to leave for the distant city where Hannah's cousin lived. The wagon borrowed for the trip was old and squeaked at every turn. The morning was gray and cold. Eli loaded the few belongings they had salvaged, a chest of keepsakes, some clothes, and a worn Bible. Blaze trotted alongside Noah, alert and restless. At the edge of the farm, Eli paused and turned for one last look at the blackened land. His eyes were hard, full of quiet fury. We'll be back, he said under his breath. Someday. The journey to the city took 2 days. They spent the nights in roadside inns, where Blaze lay across the doorway of their room as if standing guard. Noah barely slept, plagued by dreams of fire and the shadowy figure of Clint Voss watching from the hill. When they reached the city, the noise and bustle overwhelmed Noah. The streets were crowded with wagons, the air heavy with the smell of coal smoke. Hannah's cousin Martha, welcomed them warmly, but her small home was cramped. There was little space for a growing boy and a big farm dog. Over the following weeks, things grew tense. Eli struggled to find work. Hannah's cough worsened. Noah kept mostly to himself, spending his time walking Blaze in the narrow alleys behind the house. The dog seemed uneasy in the city, always lifting his head at strange noises, as if missing the open fields. One cold evening, as they returned from a walk, they overheard two men talking outside a tavern. Noah stopped, tugging Blaze to stay quiet. "Voss is buying up the farms along the river," one man said. "That fire last month scared a lot of folks into selling cheap." The other spat on the ground. "Scared 'em or burn 'em out. Either way, he'll own the whole valley soon." Noah's heart pounded. He clenched Blaze's leash so tightly that the dog turned his head to look at him. That night, he couldn't sleep. Lying on his cot beside the softly snoring Blaze, he whispered, "He's not done. We have to do something." The next day brought more bad news. Martha told Eli that there was no longer room in the house for all of them. A cousin from out west was arriving, and the space would be too cramped. After a difficult conversation, it was decided that Noah would stay with Martha for now, while Eli went farther upriver to look for work. Hannah, still coughing, would travel with Eli to be near a doctor. Noah tried to be brave when they parted. "I'll take care of Blaze," he promised, hugging his father tightly. Eli rested a hand on his son's shoulder. "Be strong, Noah. We'll send for you as soon as we can." As the wagon carrying his parents rattled away, Noah stood in the street with Blaze at his side, feeling smaller than he ever had before. The dog pressed his warm body against the boy's leg, as if lending him strength. The weeks that followed were lonely ones. Noah helped around Martha's house, ran errands in the busy streets, and spent his evenings talking to Blaze. The dog listened with solemn eyes, tilting his head as if he understood every word. Then, one chilly morning, a letter arrived from Eli. The work upriver was hard but steady, and Hannah was being treated by a good doctor. But the letter carried a warning. "Voss is moving closer. Don't trust strangers asking about us. Keep your eyes open." Noah folded the letter and slipped it under his pillow. That night, he sat on the stoop outside the house, Blaze lying at his feet. The stars above the city were dim and few, but the boy's voice was steady as he said, "We'll protect them, Blaze. Whatever it takes." Blaze lifted his head and looked at him, then rested his chin on Noah's knee. The bond between them, forged in the fire, felt stronger than ever. One stormy afternoon, several weeks later, Martha sent Noah to the market. As he and Blaze returned with a basket of bread and vegetables, they passed a notice posted on a wall. Clint Voss to host land auction. All remaining riverside properties to be sold. Noah stopped in his tracks, staring at the bold letters. His heart thudded. Voss wasn't finished. He was closing his grip on the valley. Blaze gave a low growl, as if sensing his young master's anger. That night, Noah couldn't shake the thought of the notice. Sitting by the dim lamplight, he whispered to Blaze, "He thinks he's won. But we're not going to let him. Are we?" Blaze's ears perked, his eyes gleaming in the half-light. Outside, the rain drummed on the roof. In the darkness beyond the city streets, somewhere out there in the river valley, Clint Voss was building his empire on the ashes of other people's homes. And on that cold night, in the heart of the city, a boy and his dog quietly made a promise that would lead them back to the valley, to the man who had destroyed their lives. The valley looked nothing like the home Noah remembered. As the wagon crested the ridge at dawn, he saw wide swaths of burned fields now fenced in by crude wooden posts bearing the mark, Voss Ranch. The river glinted like a silver blade under the pale sky, but the once lively farms along its banks were gone, either abandoned or turned into grazing land for Clint Voss's cattle. Blaze stood in the back of the wagon, ears pricked, a low rumble rising in his throat. Noah rested a hand on the dog's shoulder and whispered, "We're back, old friend. It's time." Noah was 15 now, leaner and taller, with the kind of quiet hardness that came from 3 years of loss and waiting. Beside him on the wagon seat, old Ben Carter, a former neighbor who had agreed to help, flicked the reins and muttered, Best keep your head down, boy. Voss don't like strangers poking around. Noah kept his eyes on the distant ranch house that stood on a hill like a fortress. I'm not here to poke around. I'm here to see what he's done. They arrived in the small riverside town as the morning market was opening. Noah stepped down, Blaze leaping lightly beside him. The boy carried a worn satchel with a few clothes and a folded letter from Eli. His father was still away working upriver, his mother recovering slowly, but not yet strong enough to return. Ben Carter slapped Noah on the shoulder. I'll stable the horse. You go see the sheriff first. He'll remember you. The sheriff was older now, more lined and more tired. He studied Noah for a long moment before saying, You're back sooner than I expected. I'm here because Voss took everything from us, Noah replied. And he's still taking from others. The sheriff sighed, leaning back in his chair. I don't like the man either, but he owns half the valley outright. Folks sign their land over to him, 'cause they're scared or broke. That ain't illegal. It was when he burned our farm, Noah said sharply. The sheriff's eyes softened for a moment. I know what happened, but I need proof, son. Real proof. Noah nodded tightly. Then I'll find it. That night, Noah and Blaze slept in the loft of Ben Carter's small barn. The wind rattled the loose boards. From where he lay, Noah could see the lights of Voss's ranch house glowing like a watchful eye on the hill. Blaze lay with his chin on his paws, ears twitching at every distant sound. Tomorrow we start, Noah whispered. Blaze lifted his head and thumped his tail once, as if in agreement. The next morning, Noah began walking the valley roads with Blaze at his side, talking to the remaining farmers. Many turned him away, afraid of Voss's men. But a few, seeing the fire in his eyes, spoke in hushed tones. Voss has been sending his boys to scare folks at night, an old farmer said, glancing around nervously. They run off cattle, set little fires in the fields. Nothing that leaves proof. Another added, he wants the riverbank land. Says he's gonna build a new rail spur for his cattle. Anyone who won't sell, well, things start happening. Noah listened, taking notes in a small book. Blaze sat quietly, eyes never leaving the farmer's yard gate, alert for trouble. Late one afternoon, as they crossed the rocky stretch near the river, Blaze stopped abruptly. His ears went forward, tail stiff. A moment later, Noah heard it too, the distant whinny of a horse, followed by the sharp crack of a whip and a man's angry shout. Noah crouched low and crept toward the sound, Blaze moving silently beside him. Through a gap in the brush, they saw two of Voss's hired men harassing a lone farmer who had refused to sell his land. They were trying to drive off his cattle, using the whip to scare the animals toward the river. Noah's hands clenched into fists. We can't just watch, he whispered. Before he could move, Blaze slipped from his side like a shadow. The dog streaked across the field with surprising speed and power. One of the men swung the whip toward Blaze, but the dog dodged and lunged, knocking the man off his feet. The other thug cursed and tried to draw a pistol, but Blaze's growl, deep, fierce, and wild, made the man hesitate just long enough for Noah to grab a fallen branch and charge. Leave him alone, Noah shouted. The first man scrambled to his feet and swung the whip again, but Noah ducked and swung the branch, landing a hard blow across the man's shoulder. The second man raised his pistol. Then Blaze leapt, teeth flashing, and clamped onto the man's arm, shaking it until the gun clattered to the ground. The two men backed away, swearing, one clutching his bitten arm. You'll regret this, boy, he snarled. Voss will hear about it. Let him hear, Noah shot back, his voice steady though his heart pounded. As the thugs retreated, the grateful farmer hurried over. You shouldn't have interfered, he said, though his eyes shone with relief. Voss won't take kindly to this. Noah straightened, resting a hand on Blaze's neck. He started this. I'm just not running anymore. That night, word of the confrontation spread quietly among the valley folk. Some were afraid, but others began to look at the boy and his dog with something like hope. A few days later, Noah returned to the sheriff with his notes and the farmer as a witness to the attack. The sheriff listened grimly. This is a start, he said. If we can catch Voss's men in the act, I can move on him. But be careful, Noah. He's not the kind of man who forgives. On their way back to the barn that evening, Noah paused at the ridge and looked down at the valley glowing in the late sunset. The fences of Voss Ranch cut across the land like scars. He tightened his grip on Blaze's collar. "We're not alone anymore," he murmured. "People are starting to see what he really is. We just have to keep going." Blaze pressed against his side, his eyes reflecting the fading light like twin embers. In the gathering dusk, the distant howl of a coyote rose over the valley. But to Noah, it sounded less like a threat and more like a promise that the wild land itself hadn't given up, and neither would he. The night Clint Voss finally met his reckoning smelled of rain and gunpowder. Thunder rumbled over the valley as dark clouds smothered the moon. From the ridge above Voss Ranch, Noah crouched low in the wet grass, his breath coming fast but steady. Beside him, Blaze stood poised, hackles raised, golden eyes locked on the sprawling ranch house below. Somewhere down there were the ledgers, proof of Voss's theft and the fire that had destroyed Noah's home. Lightning split the sky, and for a brief heartbeat the boy and the dog were framed in silver light, united by the same unshakable purpose. Tonight, the truth would come out. The plan was risky. Sheriff McAllister had agreed to act only if he had solid evidence. Noah had overheard one of Voss's men bragging in the saloon that the ledgers were locked in a heavy chest in the ranch house office. If they could get them out, the sheriff could move against Voss. But if they were caught, there would be no mercy. Rain began to drizzle as they crept down the slope. The ranch was quieter than usual. Most of Voss's men were still at the saloon, sheltering from the storm. The wind rattled the barn doors and sent the horses stamping uneasily. Noah paused in the shadow of the stable. "Stay close," he whispered to Blaze. They slipped across the muddy yard toward the side porch of the ranch house. The door was locked. Noah pulled a slim metal tool from his pocket, one he had borrowed from Ben Carter, who had warned him not to be foolish. His hands trembled as he worked the lock, but Blaze stayed at his side, calm and watchful. A soft click. The door eased open. They slipped inside. The house smelled of smoke and leather. The only light came from the dying embers in the hearth. Noah's eyes adjusted as he scanned the room, remembering the overheard directions. Through the hall, past the trophy wall, second door on the left. The hall was lined with mounted antlers and wolf pelts, trophies of Voss's conquests. Blaze's lip curled in a silent snarl as they passed. Reaching the office door, Noah tried the handle. Locked again. His heart thudded as he worked at the second lock, listening for any sound from above. Outside, thunder cracked like a rifle shot, masking the soft click of the tumblers. The chest was there, just as promised, a massive iron-bound box in the corner. Noah dropped to his knees and tried the lid. It didn't budge. A heavy padlock barred the way. He bit his lip, frustration rising. Then he heard a faint shuffle outside the window. Blaze's ears shut up. The dog gave a low, warning growl. Voices. Rough, slurred voices. Voss's men, returning earlier than expected. Noah's pulse spiked. There was no time for the padlock. He looked at Blaze. "We can't carry it out. We'll have to take what's inside." He grabbed the iron poker from the fireplace and swung it hard at the padlock. The metal clanged, jarring his arms, but the lock cracked slightly. He struck again and again, until the lock snapped and the chest creaked open. Inside were stacks of papers, ledgers bound in leather, and a small tin box. Noah grabbed them all and stuffed them into his satchel. He had just slung it over his shoulder when the door behind him burst open. Two of Voss's men staggered in, wet from the rain. One held a lantern, the other a revolver. "Well, look what we got here," the gunman sneered. "The farmer boy." Noah froze. Blaze stepped forward, shoulders low, teeth bared. The man with the lantern chuckled. "Boss said if the kid came back, we could deal with him ourselves." The gunman leveled the revolver, but in that same heartbeat Blaze sprang like a thunderbolt. He slammed into the man's arm, teeth sinking deep, knocking the shot wild. The lantern crashed to the floor, spilling oil that caught the hearth embers and flared into flame. "Get him off," the the man screamed, trying to shake Blaze loose. The other lunged for Noah, but the boy ducked, swung the poker, and cracked it against the man's knee, sending him stumbling. The flames spread fast, licking up the curtains. Smoke billowed through the room. "Come on, Blaze," Noah shouted. Blaze released the man's arm and bounded after Noah as they bolted into the hall. Behind them, the two thugs coughed and cursed as the fire roared to life. They burst out the side door into the rain-swept yard, only to find Clint Voss himself striding toward them from the barn, a shotgun in his hands. Well, Voss drawled, his eyes glittering in the lantern light. "The boy and his mutt. I should have finished you off the night your farm burned." Noah stood his ground, clutching the satchel tight. "You're finished tonight, Voss. The sheriff will have everything he needs." Voss laughed harshly. "You think anyone in this valley will stand against me? Hand it over, boy, or I'll feed your dog to the buzzards." The rain hissed on the hot shotgun barrels. Blaze's growl rolled deep and low, like distant thunder. Voss raised the gun. At that instant, a shout came from the ridge. "Drop it, Voss." The sheriff rode down with 3 deputies, rifles leveled. Behind them, a few townsfolk who had followed, emboldened by the rising fire and the hope of justice. Voss spun halfway, cursing, and that moment of distraction was all Blaze needed. The dog lunged, clamping onto Voss's wrist, jerking the shotgun aside as it went off harmlessly into the mud. Deputies rushed forward, wrestling the weapon away and forcing Voss to his knees. The ranch house behind them was an inferno now, flames leaping into the night sky. Rain hissed as it fell, but it wasn't enough to save the building. Sparks drifted on the wind like fireflies. The sheriff took the satchel from Noah and flipped through the wet but intact ledgers. His face hardened. "This is enough to bury you, Voss." Noah, soaked and trembling, knelt beside Blaze, checking the dog's side for injuries. Blaze licked his hand once and sat, tail thumping weakly, but eyes still bright. The townsfolk gathered as deputies hauled Voss away in iron cuffs. For the first time in years, the valley felt as though a weight had been lifted. Later, as dawn broke over the smoldering ruins of Voss Ranch, Noah stood at the ridge with Blaze by his side. The boy's clothes were damp and torn, his hands blistered from the poker, but there was a steady light in his eyes. "We did it," he whispered, scratching behind Blaze's ears. "Pa will come home to a different valley now. Ma can rest easy." Blaze leaned against him, quiet and loyal as ever, watching the sunrise with the boy he had guarded all these years. For the people of the valley, that day marked the end of fear. For Noah and his family, it was the beginning of healing. And for Blaze, the stray who had once limped onto a burned farmyard, it was the day he became a legend.